All right.
This thing on. Okay, now it's on. All right. Thank you. All right, so our next speaker, I kind of think doesn't need an introduction. He's a personal hero of mine.
JT! Woo! JT, move!
All right, yeah, JT Eberhard.
While I'm ahead, I'm just going to stop right there in I'm going to Disney World. My name is JT Eberhard. I write a blog. The link's on there. I'm a columnist for American Atheist magazine now. If you become a member of American Atheists, blah, blah, blah. If you become a member of American Atheists, you get a digital copy every month. Pretty sweet. Okay. For those of you who saw this at Skepticon, I had to change the end because I have no one to propose to this time. At Skepticon 3, I did a talk called Dear Christian. It was a hypothetical talk with most of the Christians I encounter. I spent a year going to church and listening to their arguments, and whenever they would stand to sing, I wouldn't stand, and whenever they'd stand to pray, I wouldn't stand. And so then, like, white blood cells to an infection afterwards, they all came up to me like, "You're new here." I'm like, "Yep, I'm an atheist. Why should I believe this?" And so they had some interesting arguments, and I talked about those, but there were too many of them to put into one talk. So I had to write a second talk. We did Dear Christian 2, The Reckoning. This talk is for the Christians in the pews who might be catching wise, who might be starting to get a little bit suspicious. It's always occurred to me that if I were to come across someone dangling over the edge of a cliff trying to crawl back, to save their life, that person would become the entirety of my existence. I wouldn't be thinking about video games, girls, as much as I like girls, women. Wouldn't be thinking about any of that stuff. All I'd be thinking about was rescuing that person. And this is just someone who's about to lose his ability to experience. Now, to the Christian who believes there's literally a heaven and literally a hell, every time they walk by a hospital, even if atheists are 10% of the population, here's a building full of people who are not only about to just stop being able to experience anything, but who are about to start experiencing the most pure and ultimate suffering for all of eternity. And they think about women and video games. This talk is for those Christians, the ones who may not be living as though that this is the most important thing in their life. The ones who might be starting to doubt their preachers, but who are still in the pews. And my message to you is this. God, if He exists, has abandoned you. He's abandoned us. I'm going to get into more of that, but first I want to tell you why I care. How many of you have had Christians say, these are my beliefs, they're sacred to me. Why do you care? Why is it any of your business? Glad you asked. I have an answer to that. I care because I think it's our moral responsibility to make every attempt to be reasonable that we can. And the example I always bring up, and have been bringing up for years, is the story of Madeline Newman. She was 11 years old when her breathing became difficult, she was racked with pain, her skin became purple. And this is over a course of 2 weeks. And eventually she died of type 1 diabetes, something completely treatable. And without me telling you, everybody in this room knows why she died. Because instead of summoning an ambulance, her parents and everybody close to her prayed and prayed and prayed until finally they prayed her to death. Now, if the word bad is to have any meaningful definition, parents who watch while their child dies are bad. It was through their negligence that their child died. But reading the stories like this, and if you read the news, stories like this come up once every couple of months. Some parents neglect their child to death in the name of faith. Looking at those stories, I don't see those parents as being a whole lot different from me, because they loved their daughter as much as I would love my child, and they wanted their daughter to get well as much as I would want my child to get well. The problem wasn't, as Christianity would often have us believe, that there's some malicious part of the human condition that makes us terrible. The problem with parents like this are just that they had a bad idea about how the universe worked. And once they had that bad idea rattling around their brains, all the good intentions in the world weren't enough to save their daughter. So what does this mean to me, to every Christian, to every atheist? It means that if you have good intentions, and I think virtually every single human being does, you have a moral obligation to try and be reasonable to make sure that your good intentions are borne out in reality. Which is why when Christians say to me, my beliefs are different than theirs, so what? You need to tell me why your beliefs are more likely to be true. And I don't think the nicest Christian can demonstrate why they know God's will better than a Fred Phelps. We so often hear from Christians, we need to choose to believe in Jesus. This is one of their lead-in lines. You need to choose to believe in Jesus. And I think that's impossible, because I don't think we choose our beliefs. I think our beliefs are the product of whatever information is rattling around inside our heads, and we're powerless to do anything else. And if you doubt this, try walking up to the edge of the roof of a building and trying to convince yourself just by force of will that gravity doesn't work. And there's not a single person in this room that could do it. There's not a single person in this world who could do it, because we don't get to choose our beliefs. So, how has God abandoned us in this way? I can't just choose to believe that a Canaanite Jew rose from the dead. I might as well try to deny the existence of gravity by force of will. I can't do it. My mind is already made up for me. Yet getting into heaven has nothing to do with how kind I am, how good I am. It's based on my ability to do the impossible, to believe an absurd story for which I have no evidence. God made me with that brain and then made the conditions for getting into heaven belief in the absurd. He abandoned me in that way. He's also abandoned plenty of people in this world who suffer, who starve, children. This is a fairly tame picture of an impoverished child. If you use Google, you can find more harrowing and more difficult pictures to look at. And if you're like me, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're atheist, when you see a child like this, the only thing you can think about is, if I could feed that child, I would. If he were here, I would give him an orange. If I knew the answer to world hunger, I would implement it. But God sees every single one of these children, and He doesn't fix it. And He's got the ability to do it. If humans are more compassionate than God, if we would do more to end suffering than God, that should tell you something about whether or not God is sticking by humanity or whether He's just left us to the wind. Now, the answer you're going to get to this is, but it's free will. Free will's the limit. We have free will, and sometimes we do things that harm other people. And there's two responses to this. The first one is, I think Sam Harris came up with this. Natural disasters, hurricanes, earthquakes, these things create tons of suffering, have nothing to do with how we treat one another. Free will could be completely out of the picture and these things would still cause suffering. Another response to the free will argument is, why do we need malicious options in order to have free will? Here's what I'm talking about. Take this building, for example. We have all kinds of different ways we can behave with regards to this building. We could kick the building. We could paint the building. We could pee on the building. In which case they'd exercise their free will to give us a citation and get more money out of the organizers. Not my problem. We can't leap over the building. Can't do it. You can't convert the building into a unicorn with the power of your mind. Right? Now, we don't have these options here on the end, but so what? We still have free will. We don't need all the options in order to have free will. We just need some of the options. As long as we have choice, we can have free will. So, take all of the options God gives us within a given day. We can pet puppies. We can pray. We can pee on buildings. We can snowboard. And we can have gay sex. My man. We don't need all the options to have free will, but He leaves this one in. Why? We don't need it. No, it's not like God was stumbling around the cosmos at the beginning of time and bumped into this moral rule He didn't make. No, He makes the moral rules. Gay sex was not bad until God, for whatever reason, decided if you have sex with someone of the same gender, you burn for all eternity. But then He leaves it there. It's not like we need it for free will. This is a God that is trying to open up trapdoors into hell, not shut them. So don't spin me the free will line. Non-belief is another one. We don't need the choice to believe in God in order to have free will. It could be as innate to us as hunger, as thirst. And then we'd really have the choice of whether or not to accept God's gift, rather than just the choice whether or not to believe a Canaanite Jew rose from the dead. But then they'll say, but God wants to give us the choice to reject him. Fine. Let us all believe in God, and then we can actually make the choice of whether we want to accept the love, or the sacrifice of a guy who we weren't there to say anything about it, God could have snapped his fingers to change his moral rules, but for some reason decided to kill his son. The guy is all-powerful. They'll say he wants us to have the choice to reject him. Fine. But it's got to be an informed choice. Christians will say you need to have the choice to reject God as if it's the same thing as the choice to believe in the absurd. And it's a false dichotomy. So here are just some of the ways God has abandoned us. Entry to heaven, as you'll hear from most Christians, is based on belief. But entry to heaven could be based on compassion. I mean, the way it stands, if someone like Osama bin Laden had a deathbed conversion 5 minutes before his death, and he's sincere, he gets into heaven. Doesn't matter that he killed thousands of people who didn't know him from Adam. Whereas someone like me, who's never killed someone for darn sure, who would love to have an abortion, but that's pretty much the extent of it. Speaking of God abandoning people, pregnancy. Thanks, Elise. But who's never caused any grievous harm to another human being, and I could wind up in hell. If you think that's anything even remotely resembling justice, you have no concept of what justice is. And it's entirely likely that it's your faith in your religion that twisted you in that way. There's millions of starving children the world over. God could have made us so we didn't require food. Wouldn't have anything to do with faith. It just would have stopped suffering. It just would have accomplished what each and every one of us would have done if we had the power. I'm scheduled to do a debate in April with a pastor on do morals require a foundation in God? And the way I'm going to open it up is there's something in us that does realize immorality. He's going to say it's God. What I'm going to say is it's the part of us that reads passages in the Bible like Exodus 35:2 that says to kill anybody who works on Saturday and says, no, that's not moral. That was never moral. And it doesn't come from God, it comes from us. God could have made his existence a foregone conclusion so that anybody who wants to choose to abide by his will already knows he exists and is actually making that choice. But as it stands, God gives us greater evidence that trees exist than that God exists. Which one is the more important fact? The moment any Christian looks at a starving child and realizes that they would do what God is either unable to do or unwilling to do, they realize that they could create a better world than the world that God left us. And it's not just that. Anytime you can think of a new way to create happiness or to avoid suffering that God hasn't moved to fix himself, you are conceiving of a better world than the one God made. And if God is all-knowing, the only conclusion you can possibly reach is that he made a world of suffering on purpose, or an imperfect world on purpose. We always hear, look around you, look at the perfection of creation. It's a testament to God's perfection. Anytime you drop a bowling ball on your toes, you have just received evidence that this is not a perfect world. You'll also hear this from them. My beliefs, my religious beliefs changed my life. Awesome, I believe you. But a belief doesn't need to be true in order to change someone's life or change their behavior. If I believe there's a monster under my bed who's going to gnaw my leg off at the knee if I don't donate $100 a week to charity, I'm going to be a charitable person. I like my knees where they fucking are. But it says nothing to the existence of that monster. How many of you have heard this one? You're trying to take away my hope. Don't try to take my religious beliefs away from me. You're trying to take away my hope. Hope is based in reality. True hope is based in reality. If there's a meteor heading towards Earth, it's going to hit the Earth. We can pray that it misses, Or we can get into a lab, trust our scientists, trust the perspicacity of humanity to find a solution. Real hope comes with knowing about how the universe really works. When people are sick, sure, we can pray, or we can come up with medical technologies that save people. If we want to get across the United States, we can invent airplanes. In fact, pretty much every human innovation is a testament to the uselessness of prayer. Real hope is based on correctly assessing what is threatening us, the problems with humanity, and applying our intellect to the problem. Human intellect is our salvation in this sense. Empty hope is just a waste of time. So, if you're a Christian, I know you're probably scared to die. We're all scared to die. We're scared of disease. We're scared of everything that threatens humanity. But just sitting around believing we've already found the solution to it is nothing more than a waste of time. And to call it hope really does a disservice to what humans are capable of when they sit down and focus and look at the world for what it really is. So I believe your beliefs changed your life. But I also believe that being reasonable and learning about the world and seeing it as it truly is can change your life in ways that the false promises of religion never could. And if you go to the doctor instead of just praying for your child, then you believe it too. The question you'll get next is, well then from whence comes the universe? I don't know. Doesn't mean you do. Right? If not for God, from whence comes the universe? And the thing is, there was once a time when nothing was explained. Nothing at all. And ever since that time, quite literally everything we have explained has been found to be the product of natural causes, just mindless forces acting upon inanimate objects. All of them. Literally. How do you think all the others are going to turn out? Human ignorance, in the case of parents that pray for their child rather than take them to the doctor, human ignorance is something we need to purge from humanity at the greatest rate possible. And we're working to do it because we realize that the more ignorant we are, the less happy we are. So if you're going to say to me, well, we don't know who created the universe, or you don't know what created the universe, therefore I do, and of course it's God, you are equating God with human ignorance. You're making God the equivalent of what we don't know. You're not doing God any favors by this, by making God the same thing as this thing we're trying to get rid of. I mean, lightning wasn't the punishment of an angry God. It was mindless forces acting upon inanimate objects. Earthquakes are the same way. How many of you have heard William Lane Craig's Callum argument? You know, the one he always uses all the time to the exclusion of anything else. That one. Imagine how this would have worked before we've discovered plate tectonics. William Lane Craig would be on stage saying, matter doesn't move itself. There must be a prime mover somewhere with intelligence to move things. Then we found plate tectonics, and that theory, it's treating it a little too charitably, that very weak hypothesis gets blown to shit. How do you think it's going to turn out when we figure out what originated our universe? This is the argument I most get from religious people. How did this happen if not by God? As if my ignorance was the equivalent of their knowledge. And this should tell you something. This should tell you that the best weapon God has given the Christian is human ignorance. Quite literally the worst of humanity, and this is what they have to work with. This is what God has given them to work with. Because let's face it, science is growing, and as science grows, things like lightning being the punishment of an angry God shrink. There's only solace for the Christian in what humanity doesn't already know. And if you think that's the best God can give you, you are wrong. God has abandoned you. God could have given the Christian every single advantage in the debate for his existence. And this is what he gave. God hasn't just abandoned the atheist. God has abandoned the people who love him, who want to defend his existence. Now, if you're like me, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, whatever, you marvel at the universe. You look at the world and you see it as beautiful. If you're a Christian, you probably see it as beautiful because you think that you're communing with God in some way by looking and admiring his work. And you know how I know that? Because I was there. In high school, I was as much of a believer as there was. I went to Promise Keepers and everything. I feel horrible about it. Wasn't a joke. It's a large part of what motivates me today to make good on what a horrible person my religion made me when I was in high school. And I've always had a thing for astronomy, and especially back then. I grew up in Bumblefuck, Arkansas. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yeah, Bumblefuck. Which is great if you love the stars because there's no light pollution. You can see tons of them. And I spent so many summer nights up looking at the stars, and it meant so much to me because I knew that God made them. Now, I didn't know how they worked. I mean, that's, scientists were learning that. They were learning, what mechanisms God used. But the point is that God made them, and I was appreciating it. And this was bringing me closer to God. And then I went to college, and I audited astronomy courses. And after I understood the genes instability and how to experience the universe in terms of logarithmic functions to understand how vast it is in ways that I could never imagine on my own, then everything I looked at was so much more beautiful to me. And I realized that when I didn't know anything about them, when I just said, God did it, that was the end of it, I had given a name to my ignorance, and I had called it God. And in that way, my ignorance came to mean something to me. And I wish that had never happened. And if you're anything like me, dear Christian, I invite you to do the same. If something strikes you as beautiful, whether it's a painting, whether it's a person, whether it's a fact about the universe, learn more about it. Learn how it really works. And see if it doesn't look more beautiful to you. And the more beautiful it looks to you, the more useless and ugly God is going to get. The ultimate expression of the argument from ignorance, you can't prove God doesn't exist. Yeah, well, if you're a Christian, you can't prove Smurfs don't exist. And how's it they say, whatever method you use to disprove Smurfs, let me know. I'll use it. But the thing is, I find when I'm arguing with Christians that they're ready for this. You can't prove God doesn't exist. You can't prove Smurfs don't exist. And they'll immediately fire back with, yeah, but God's real. As if that settles the argument. And I think it's just because they've heard this so many times. Lately I've been trying a different approach in the last few years. Whenever they say, you can't prove God doesn't exist, the next words out of my mouth are, you're a thief. Like, what? You're a thief. You steal shit from people. Stop doing it. They'll say, well, I'm not a thief. I'll say, prove you're not a thief. And the next words out of their mouth are invariably, well, there's no evidence that... Oh. But stuff like this takes them off the script. It produces cognitive dissonance. What I said earlier about us not being able to choose their beliefs, it's a two-way sword. How many of you ever heard another atheist say, yeah, why do you argue with religious people? You'll never make any headway. Fuck those people. Seriously. And I stole this from Greta Christine. I hope she doesn't mind if I keep stealing it. Raise your hand if you used to be religious. Okay, now leave your hands in the air. Leave your hand in the air if an argument from someone, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, a friend of yours, if something someone said to you at some point helped you deconvert, leave your hand in the air. Well, shit, damn, it's almost everybody. It makes a difference. We don't choose our beliefs. If the right facts get into your head, you're going to change your mind. It might happen slowly, it might happen over years, and it might happen all the while you don't want it to happen with every fiber of your being, which is pretty much how most deconversions happen. Tell them we're busy. But it's going to happen. But to explain moral rules, don't we need God? If Matt Dillahunty were here, he'd probably vomit right now. He'd probably vomit blood. This is the killer argument right now. Don't we need, we all have that, when we read the shitty passages in the Bible that tell us to do immoral things, we go like, that's not moral. There's that sense inside us. Some say it would come from God. Why that impulse would tell us why much of the Old Testament is barbaric, I don't know, but it does. But I don't think so. And if you guys heard this quote, with or without it, you would have good people doing good things, evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. This is the first time I'll ever disagree with a Nobel laureate. Because religion isn't the source of all ignorance, isn't the source of all bad reasoning. You can have political dogmas where you do, where your intentions are good and you mistakenly do bad things even though your intentions are good. However, virtually every institution on our planet realizes that reason is good. The more reasonable we are, the more information we have, the better we're doing. We don't have enough food, so we create the Haber process. Stuff like that. Come on in, water's warm. Religion is the only one telling us that not only is it okay to be unreasonable, faith, but you damn well better be unreasonable, you're going to pay the price for it. So I think it gets a little more of the culpability. But in order for good people to do bad things, I think one of two things needs to be in place. You either need to be ignorant of the facts, or you need to have made a virtue of being unreasonable. And religion is great at getting people to do that. So when you talk about a secular basis for morality, this is what you're going to hear. You can't get an ought from an is, but actually you can. You do it all the time. For instance, if you want to smell good, you ought to take a shower. A couple things have to be true. You must want to be clean, and the shower must not melt off your skin or have some other deleterious effect you don't want. But as long as those things are true, the moral statement is true. If you want to smell good, you ought to take a shower. If you want your car to run, you ought to change the oil. All the ought statements are based on what we want. And even religious people behave this way. You must want to follow God. Try asking a religious person, if you found out today that the moral rules were inverted and that obeying the 10 Commandments landed you in hell and disobeying them got you into heaven, what would you do? Every time I've asked that question, they say, well, I would disobey the 10 Commandments because obviously I want to go to heaven. Their wants are relevant. And if we don't want the same things as them, how can they appeal to us? You should follow the 10 Commandments. Why? You'll go to heaven. What if I don't want to go to heaven? What if I want to go to hell? How can you possibly appeal to me at that point to behave as you behave? So in order to figure out what is moral, we need to figure out what desire morality satisfies in us. What do we want? And it's pretty simple. We all want to be happy. That's why we have jobs we hate, because we'd rather have a roof over our head and food in our stomachs, right? And it's pretty easy to see that there's certain things that do make us happy. Being generous, being responsible, the smiles of others. And there's a reason smiles are contagious. There's also a reason that when we see blood in horror movies and people injured, we go, because we feel their pain. Do unto others as you would have done to you isn't morally right because God says it is. It's right because it makes for a better world. You don't need God to make moral rules. You just need to realize that if you spent your life running around killing your neighbors, raping their pets, and stealing their pornography as a rule of thumb, it's going to be a world unhappy for everyone. The next thing you'll get is prophecy. The Bible is full of very vague prophecies. Here's an example. This is the one about whom it is written. I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare the way before you. And Jesus proclaims this is fulfilled by John. But it's really, really vague. Here's a prophecy I made up a few months ago. There'll come a time when 3 evil men will rise to power, and a woman will oppose them, leading the people against them. I'd wager virtually everything I owned in the next 20 years this prophecy would be fulfilled. God could do better. And here's my horoscope for today. You experience a great burst of energy that should help you achieve almost anything close to your heart. A new love, a big win in business, or even a quiet reconciliation are all possible. Holy shit, it's a miracle. Imagine what you could do if you went back to the time of Jesus with an encyclopedia or even Google. In the 2nd century of Rome, there'll be 5 emperors. They'll be named Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. That's a fucking prophecy. It's specific. It looks like you had preordained information. And this is what a mortal could do. If God's omnipotent, or omniscient, the knowledge we have is pretty slim by comparison. And this is what we could do. Is it so wrong to expect God to be able to do better? Cheating prophecies. The Bible's also full of these. This is Zechariah 9:9. This is one of the ones you will always get when you're arguing with people on prophecy. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now, Jesus was a rabbi. He would have known what the Old Testament said here. And if you think this is just speculation on my part, check out Matthew 21. Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, tell him that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. How hard is it to fulfill a prophecy you already know about beforehand? Hint, not. So prophecy is no good. Presuppositionalism, another hot one right now. How is reason even possible without God? Matter is just this stuff that's incapable of thought. Well, yes, sort of, kind of, arranged the right way. Here's a bunch of parts made up of matter, completely incapable of thought, can't perform logic at all, but arrange them in the right way, and they can perform logic. So clearly matter arranged in the proper way can perform logic, can think, and can even feel. Now, what they'll say then is, ha 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 ha, computers don't build themselves, and they need a designer. So if we can think, obviously we have a designer. Well, no. The reason computers don't build themselves, and paintings don't paint themselves, and buildings don't build themselves, is because they're not made of molecules that self-replicate. We are. And when you have a situation where you have molecules that self-replicate with three forces in place, these three, reproduction, mutation, and selection, increased functionality in whatever environment is going to be the net result over time. So here we have, it's called evolution, you're going to love it, it's this new thing. If arranging matter in a certain way to allow us to reason would be advantageous, it makes sense it would have been selected for. But if reason is only the product of unthinking matter, how do we know we can trust it? Well, do you have something better? Oh no. Go ahead and stick with reason like you do for everything else. I was in a debate once with a philosopher type, and I say philosopher type because Richard Carrier, John Corvino, Daniel Dennett, great philosophers. He was a philosopher type, and he said, I can prove to you that reason isn't the best way to reach conclusions. And I said, okay, but if you give me a reason, it's over. Like, if you use the word because, you've lost the debate. God speaks to me. You guys heard that one? I speak to God, God speaks back. Who doesn't God speak to? I mean, seriously. If you're a Christian, you believe you have the one true faith on your hands, God doesn't speak to every sincere Hindu who believe God's speaking to them and they're speaking to God. They're sincere. They're just either lying, deluded, or crazy. Nothing wrong with being crazy. Same with every other pagan, every Muslim. And pretty much anyone who wasn't a Christian throughout all of history, which is virtually every believer in God ever, thought they were speaking to God, or God was speaking back and sending them messages. But if your religion is true, dear Christian, then they were wrong. Sincere, but wrong. So the starting probability that someone is sincere and believes God is speaking to them and being right is already pretty low. What keeps me from saying that all of them are either lying, deluded, or crazy, including you, dear Christian? Now, who else does God not speak to? God doesn't speak to Andrea Yates, the extremely Christian woman who drowned her children because God told her to do so. He didn't speak to Daphne Spurlock, the insanely religious woman, literally, who slit her son's throat at the behest of God's voice. Now you'll hear from religious people like God would never command that. Oh yeah? God didn't tell that person to kill their child. He told Abraham to kill his child. Get with the picture. He didn't tell Daphne Spurlock to kill her children. He told Jephthah to kill his daughter. Clearly, God is in the business of telling people to kill their children sometimes. Why not them? What separates the Abrahams and the Jephthahs from the Daphne Spurlocks and the Andrea Yates and the countless other people who were willing to kill their children because of faith? And not just because of... Even if they were right. Clearly, we don't think they were. But even Christians don't think they were. But even if they were right, and God came down to you and said, I need you to kill your child. This is taught in every single Sunday school as a good story. God spoke to Abraham, said kill your son, and Abraham was willing to do it. Abraham was the hero. Abraham was a fuck-up. He was a terrible human being. In any sane moral sense, Abraham failed the test. He said, as Christopher Hitchens said, yes, I'd be willing to gut my children. And also, as Hitchens said, if God came down to me and said, I want you to kill your child, even though I would know he was the ultimate power in all the universe and that he really existed, the next words out of my mouth would be, fuck you. I'd rather die than kill my children. That is the proper moral response. You'll get this in response. Look at all those horrible Christians. Look at the Westboro Baptist people. Look at the Andrea Yates, the Daphne Spurlock. And you'll get it from the nicest Christians. My beliefs are different. That isn't true Christianity. I could give a shit less if your beliefs are different. I give a great shit more if they're more credible. Start telling me why they're true, not just that they're different. Thank you for that round of applause. But I feel God. Maybe God doesn't speak to me when I pray, I feel it. And Christians, I believe you are sincere. I believe you pray and you feel something. But the thing is, our senses are not always reliable in that sense. After all, Muslims feel God, but they're a little wrong about things. Your senses aren't always exactly reliable. Take this. Square A and square B are the same color. Check it out. Yeah? But yeah, I've done this for people before, and they said, it changed colors as it went down. Try it this way. They're the same color. And even when I take them away, they'll still strike you as a different color, because your senses are not always reliable. This is how magicians make their living, counting on your senses to deceive you. And if a magician does something, like, what is more likely? That bottle caps pass through air into the other hand, or that your senses were deceived in some way. So you pray and you feel something. You feel like God is speaking to you. Why would God give you these nebulous, fuzzy feelings as his means of communication, especially when heaven and hell are on the line, when he could come knock on your front door? I mean, hell, I have tuna helpers. Swing by. I have questions. You have answers. Let's work. Think of all the ways in which you should trust your understanding of reality over the fuzzy feelings you get when you pray. People don't rise from the dead. If you write that it does on a medical test trying to become a doctor, you will fail. It doesn't matter if you have it on your parents' authority that they don't. The next words out of the teacher's mouth are going to be, but your parents are wrong. People don't rise from the dead. We bury people all the time without fear they're going to rise. People don't walk on water. If people from the first century tell you he did and wrote it down, tough, they were wrong. At best, lying at worst. Prayer is a crapshoot. God will help Ray Lewis win the Super Bowl, but he won't feed a starving fucking child. Prayer is a crapshoot. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Kind of like we'd expect in a universe without a God. Biblical barbarity was never moral. You hear this when you bring up the Old Testament. Exodus 35:2, kill anybody who works on a Saturday. What the Christian will tell you is, but Jesus came and he changed all that. And I wonder if they hear what they're saying. They're saying that at one point, this was perfectly okay and perfectly good. No, never. Even back when that passage in Exodus was written, plenty of Greek and Roman philosophers had done better by then and realized that maybe killing people for working on a particular day isn't the most moral thing we could be doing. Nobody could survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Not even on Nickelodeon. People don't get converted into pillars of salt. We can't even accomplish this with modern chemistry. Anybody telling you they have was wrong. How are we doing on time, Kevin? Awesome. But there's a catch-all. Well, no matter what, no matter how ridiculous, no matter how absurd, no matter how lacking the evidence, there's always a fail-safe, and it's faith. It doesn't matter if it's ludicrous, I have faith. Well, nobody wants to be gullible, so do me a favor and try to distinguish faith from gullibility for me. What exactly is the difference? When one is believing things for terrible reasons and the other one is being gullible. Expected a better laugh there. How many of you saw this at Skepticon? Not the same ending. You hear this. What about love? You can't feel love. Love is this untouchable thing. You can't prove love exists. And God is kind of like that. God is love, right? But love is not a tangible thing. Love is a state of the brain, like happiness or sadness. Being in love is just a way you feel. And we have tons of evidence for that, right? I mean, when people are happy, they smile. When they're sad, they frown, they cry. And when people are in love, they behave a certain way. Belief in God is a state of the brain. And no thinking person would ever say that belief in God doesn't exist. Obviously, the way people behave suggests their brain is in that particular state. And love is that way too. God is not a state of the brain, though. God should be as tangible as this auditorium, as this podium. And like I said before, he's given us infinitely more evidence that the podium exists than he exists. Why, if belief in him is such an important thing? Think about all the ways God could have made it better. All the great pieces of evidence he could have given the Christian. Could have given you, your Christian, if you're listening to this on YouTube. And he didn't. If you read my blog, and you're a religious person, you might get the impression that I hate you. But I don't hate you. I never did hate you. I hate ignorance. And I hate bad reasoning. Because it results in things like people praying their children to death even when they want them to get well. It results in people wasting their time and their effort on false, powerless hope when they could be learning about the way the universe works. And I hate it. I hate it that these things so often are rattling around inside the heads of otherwise good people. I hate telling people they're wrong. But I would hate it even more sitting around and not doing anything. So if you're one of those Christians who found any of these arguments compelling, if you're one of those Christians who's sitting in the pews, not because you believe every word out of your preacher's mouth, but because you think this is how your children have friends, and you think this is how you have a social life, you don't need to do that anymore. Go to meetup.com. There are atheist groups in virtually every town and every city in this country now. We are growing at an astronomical rate, and we're waiting for you. We don't hate you. We hate what religion made us. We hate the forces that keep you in the pews even if you don't want to be there. We know what it feels like to worry that our friends and family are going to ostracize us for being what we are. We know what it feels like to worry about losing a job if it comes out that we don't share the same superstitions as our superiors. And we know you're afraid of those things. But the prospect of living your own life as you want to, without feeling like you have to even just go through the inconvenience of waking up on Sunday, about being who you really are, and finding people who love you for who you really are, not just the facade you put on. It's the greatest gift you can be given. And we're waiting to give it to you. Jesus has no gift of salvation waiting for you. Every piece of salvation you've ever encountered came from a human mind. And salvation from what religion has made you, what it's done to you, lies with us. And even if you're not ready, take your time, but don't stay there because you think we're not waiting. Q&A time? Awesome. And who ruined beer time? It's you. Go for it. Yes, guy who looks like Moses. Also, Q&A. Alright. Q&A, please remember, other people want to ask questions too. Questions have a question mark, and if you violate either of those things, I'm going to cut you off. Go ahead.
I just had a couple of comments.
I love comments. They're almost as cool as questions. Comment and answer is after this.
Whenever I hear someone talking about God talking to people, I just can't help but wondering, when God is creating the universe, and He said, "Let there be light," who was He talking to?
Himself, just like every other religious person.
Another comment, a little more substantive. When I get in discussions with religious people, I sometimes ask them, well, is your God omnipotent? Oh, yes, He's very powerful. He can do anything. Well, is He omniscient? He knows everything? Yes, He knows everything. And so he knows where that bird's going to fly? Oh, yes. In fact, he probably...
Someone's been reading Iron Chariots.
Yeah. In fact, he probably even knows what you're going to do before you do it. Oh, yes, he knows everything. So you don't have any free will then, right? There's nothing more to say at that point.
Questions have a question mark.
Since this is right here, I'd still like to know what you have against buildings.
No flush handle.
No, I was just going to say that...
What I have against buildings, every time I've heard a preacher say buildings don't build themselves, and I haven't been able to punch them.
No, I just got another comment. I've run into
Most
the same...
superfluous question and answer ever.
Sorry. What you were talking about when you've gone through all the possible reasons for belief, and then they fall back on faith. What I usually say to them at that point is, well, then really your faith is just believing what you want to believe. That's all really faith is, and there's no, it's just arbitrary at that point.
I find a good, concise way to make them reconsider faith as a virtue is to put it to them to ask them, can you conceive of any position so idiotic, just so ludicrous, so just flagrantly at odds with reality that it couldn't be defended by recourse to faith? And of course the answer would be no, there is nothing that ludicrous. And then to say to them, if your faith is so secure and so strong, you've got so many good reasons, couldn't you do better than something that can be used to defend even the most idiotic ideas?
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, it's a terrible thing. If you're a debater, you know this. And William Lane Craig knows this. It takes much longer to respond to an argument than it does to make an argument, which is why Craig will throw out 50 arguments, and then when you don't get to them all, he'll be like, oh, I didn't get to all my arguments, I win. People have small attention spans. It's not their fault, it's just what humans are. It's why we care more about the Super Bowl than we do about politics generally. I find if you can have good two-line responses to the arguments like that, even if they're incomplete, I find they're often more effective.
How many conversions have you experienced with you?
Me personally, just one.
With people converting people.
I save the emails I get from people who say I had a hand either changing their mind or converting them, and it's like 153 right now. The people who say we never made headway arguing with religious people, fuck those people. It does work, but you have to get good at it. And that's what kills me about the people who say, why do you even bother? Because it's putting all the responsibility on the religious person. It's saying, I made the perfect presentation, and if they would just open their mind, my words would have had an impact. There's nothing I could have done. And it keeps them from saying, what could I have done better? How could I have changed my approach? Where was I factually lacking? And I think that's very sad that we do that. And I say 153, 152, I forget what it is right now. But how many more never wrote me back? I mean, never said anything. Atheists are really good at huddling up with ourselves and saying, oh, look, here's another way we can know that God really doesn't exist. Good job, us atheists. We're really bad about going to religious people and saying, God doesn't exist. Give me your argument. Here's the rebuttal. We're terrible about that. I love going to church and letting them mob me afterwards. You might say, you might not change someone's mind. The place to argue with religious people is in public. It's where everyone else can see. Because you might not get their mind, but you might get the mind of someone looking on who maybe even admired this person and who gets to oh man, they're getting destroyed. For the record, Greta Christina is one of my best friends, but I hate it when she gets the mic during a Q&A. She's going to ask me something hard. She always does.
Actually, I don't think this is a super hard question.
Is this a comment?
So I know that what?
Is it a comment or question?
No, it is actually a question. So I know that there's no magic bullet, but which arguments have you found to be the most effective in persuading believers out of their beliefs, or at least in getting them to start that process or move the process along, or stop and think?
Man, I missed part of that question because I was too busy thinking, wow, a sex writer just said there's no magic bullets. I know which ones are least effective. When people try to pull out the Bible and say, look, the Bible says this horrible thing, it says this thing that couldn't have happened. And the reason that is because if you're arguing Scripture, it becomes about, if you interpret that, and they'll change the definition of words to make it all fit. But what you're doing is you're both treating the Bible like it's an authority. Like if you can just figure out what it really says, that's the answer we should keep. And that's stupid. Don't do that. Plus, they can keep it vague and redefine words for hours and keep you talking about the passages in the Bible when it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the Bible said. It matters how credible the people were who wrote it. As far as getting people out of faith, one thing religion doesn't suck out of people is compassion. You might think it does because they do things like lobby against the rights of LGBT people, but their hearts are in the right place. It goes back to good intentions. They really are trying to make a better world. They really do feel the suffering of others and want to make it better. So anything you can do to show them that compassion comes from God. Was the line from my talk, every human innovation is a testament to the uselessness of prayer or even to the capriciousness of God. If God would fix these problems, we wouldn't have to. Things like that to show how human beings do better than what God could have done. Religious people want to feel special. That's why, God cares about me individually. Aren't I special? Well, try to convince them how special human beings are and how special they are to be a part of this species and how that's good all by itself. You don't need God making you that way. You need to earn it. And the only way you earn it is by being a human being.
What would you say to people who are quiet and don't want to necessarily go out and argue with people in public or even face to face?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm scared, I cry about it and it helps. Try that. No, I don't. I wrote a post about this a while back. Most of the people, if you know me when I'm not on stage and joking about magic bullets and whatnot, I can actually be fairly quiet, and I was quiet most of my life. When I started doing talks and talking about religion, you guys know when you're put on the spot and your throat gets all dry and your voice gets raspy and you shake. That was me for years. Most of the people who do this work would rather be fishing or magic bullet or what have you. If you see that there's an issue, if you see that something needs to get done, and you want to be good at a particular aspect of fixing it, if it's arguing with people or speaking or writing, do that. But that's not the only job out there, obviously. You could be the public relations coordinator for a conference or something, like you are for this one. You can work behind the scenes. There's tons of work to be done behind the scenes. What I said earlier, go to meetup.com. There's atheist groups in every city and every town across the country now, even in the deep south of all places. And that's not because of people like me going out and being boisterous. It's because of the shy people who are good at organizing and who are good at getting people together and saying, let's just go watch a movie or go bowling. That stuff's important. People want to have fun, and it doesn't happen without organization. So there's that. I know there's plenty of people who are scholars who don't want to argue, but who will provide information to the people like me who do debate, who do speak. That's good too. Do what you're capable of and what you feel moved to do.
So you talked about hope a little and what it means. Oh yeah, hi, I'm right here. And I have this little project on the side where I'm trying to convince the Christian school I went to would do something else about gay people who go there. And while thinking about how to talk to them, I've been reading the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and they define hope like this in there. Hope is the theological virtue by which we desire the kingdom of heaven, and eternal life is our happiness. I'm not going to read the rest of that sentence because it just gets worse from there. Can you give me some pointers on how to deal with talking to people?
Green tastes delicious.
Can you give me some pointers on how to talk to people who insist on redefining words so heavily?
Yeah, use it in the proper context. So when you hope they're serving pizza tonight, how does wanting to follow God factor into that equation? Yeah.
All right, last question.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Okay.
Oh,
basically, one thing I've been noticing.
Take your time. Who's after me? Oh, take your time.
Oh, I don't think they will mind. Hopefully, will forgive me.
Basically, this for me, Fitzgerald.
Where's Secret Legends?
Anyway, basically, one thing I've been noticing is like I personally like going out and talking to Christians and other people's beliefs, and just even if I'm not a very good debater, I usually like to.
Masochist.
Yeah, pretty much. I still like to talk to them and see why they think stuff. And one thing I've kind of been noticing is a lot of times I go to these churches and they have like a debate with an atheist or just kind of, or when I go to like a theology debate group, and then one thing I noticed, it just seems like there's this common theme with them where they like try to, I almost call it inoculation, where they're like, they let you come in and just talk for a little bit, and then after you're gone, then they just totally massacre your argument. And it just, is there anything that you can suggest that maybe to counter that, like we come back next week and then, or not fall for it in the first place? Or?
Get your own recording. When I was in college, I was an atheist activist and ascending to some kind of prominence then. And so every religious person in the world on campus wanted to, hey buddy, you seem like a really smart guy who's really searching for the truth. Let's go get coffee sometime, you and me, and talk about it. And me not wanting to be a dick, I was like, sure, I like making friends, I like talking about religion. And so we'd get there, and just me and them, and I'd be going through the rebuttals to all their points, and it would just turn into a skipping CD of and I started to realize that one-on-one was kind of a waste of time, until one of the people I did that with, I wound up on a debate on stage with, and he used the same argument, and I used the same rebuttal, and you could just see it in his eyes. He looks over and is about to go, and realizes there's a whole crowd of people watching him. And he just started sputtering and coming up with all kinds of different stuff trying to justify it. And he looked like a fool. Moral of the story, put eyes on it. Don't do it one-on-one, put eyes on it. They might try to cheat afterwards, but if there's eyes on it, you'll get the people who see that they're cheating. Another thing I started to do was when people say, hey, come get coffee with me and let's talk about God. You seem like a cool guy. I said, sure, sounds great. But I'm going to record it and put the unedited copy on my blog. Is that okay with you? They're concerned for my everlasting soul dried up real fun. So that would be my recommendation there. Guys, thank you so much. And before I get off the stage, the people that organized this don't make a dime, and they did it for you. Why don't you guys give them a round?